Loot Crate! What's in the box? Oh my god, what's in the box?
What's in the box?
You don't know. It's a mystery. And that was part of the charm. Loot Crate was an interesting business model that for a time was all the rage, frankly. In effect, Loot Crate featured a whole bunch of nerdy stuff, whether they be figurines or comic books or t-shirts or anything. But you didn't know what was actually in the box, and you paid a monthly subscription to receive one box per month of random stuff. That sounds really, really stupid when you say it out loud, but for a while, this was a huge fad, especially on the internet. YouTube in particular took off with it, and there were a few years when everybody, and I mean everybody, was talking about Loot Crate and doing Loot Crate unboxings and showing off what they got in their crate and just a whole thing, and it resulted in a bunch of free advertising for the service. However, Loot Crate has fallen off, and fallen off hard. They declared bankruptcy and are now under new ownership, and there are several reasons for that, and we're going to discuss them right now. Loot Crate was founded in 2012 by Wes Hartman, who personally was the president and had 57% of the company's shares at the time, as well as Chris Davis and Matthew Aravallo. The concept was Comic-Con in a box, a whole bunch of nerdy stuff in a box. And it's generally considered that the big brains behind the idea were actually Chris and Matt. In terms of their previous experience, which is super relevant to the story, well, Chris Davis is the son of tech giant Qualcomm CFO, George Davis. He graduated from Claremont McKenna College and had participated in what are called hackathons after he graduated, developing new software for various purposes. Matthew, on the other hand, had been interested in technology from a very young age, obsessed with nerd culture, especially video games, and hey, nothing wrong with that, I ain't throwing stones in this glass house. When he grew up, he began working for larger tech companies like Microsoft and Apple, but he didn't like working in the corporate world, he was bored. So he started a consulting agency focusing on social media outreach, which helped larger enterprises promote their brands through social media. Matt and Chris would meet at a business seminar in Los Angeles in August of 2012, and that's when Chris pitched the idea of the monthly subscription service for geeks and gamers. Matt really liked it, and the two would set about starting their grand project for this ridiculous idea. As I mentioned in the beginning, Loot Crate was remarkably simple in execution and concept. It was just a bunch of nerdy stuff put in a box that you got via a monthly subscription service. The price per month varied quite a bit over the company's existence, but the initial cost was simply $13.37, and things went nuts. See, the thing about Loot Crate is that, well, it basically capitalized on the effect of surprise. Some people, many people in fact, like surprises. Surprise parties, surprise gifts. Oh my goodness, I got a surprise today. And since you didn't know what was actually in the boxes, generally speaking, well, you were surprised pretty much every time you got one. Given the relatively low investment cost with the initial price, a lot of people decided, what the heck, why not? I'd get a bunch of random nerdy goodness. And they did, every single month, right on time. And Loot Crate showed up right about the time that something called unboxing videos were super popular on YouTube. People had a habit, and still do to an extent, of buying stuff, and then filming themselves opening the boxes that the stuff comes in. Usually it was some kind of tech product, but Loot Crate fit right into this niche, without question, because it was a mystery to everybody. You didn't know what was in the box when you unboxed a Loot Crate. So everyone, and I mean everyone, started making unboxing videos featuring Loot Crate. Pretty much every mainstream YouTuber did it at one point or another, showing off their latest loot, because loot is a word used in the gaming scene, talking about, collecting loot in a game. You gotta get loot, you gotta figure out what the enemies had, you gotta open the treasure chest. It's loot! Come on now! That's normal for us, isn't it? Well, for most people, yeah. And it activated those endorphins, those synapses, those brain waves. It got people excited to figure out what they were gonna get, and sometimes you got something really great, and other times maybe not so much. But hey, it was fun for a while. But that led into a lot of the issues that Loot Crate would start having. There were two major issues with Loot Crate. A, overgrowth, and B, longevity. We're going to start with the overgrowth issue because it doesn't seem to make much sense. If a company is growing, isn't that good? And yes, it is. If you can manage it. And I assure you, Wes, Chris, and Matt could not. At all. By 2014, they had ballooned in size, having 200,000 subscribers in 10 different countries. By 2016, they were ranked number 1 on Inc.'s fastest growing private companies, as well as on the Deloitte Fast 500 North America list. They were seeing insane growth, just insane. And part of that was due to the marketing. It wasn't just the free advertisement they were getting from the unboxing videos, they were also paying for a ton of sponsorships online to push the brand and getting more people to sign up. So they grew more and more, with more and more subscribers, more and more boxes to send out, and that was starting to become a major issue because managing all this was not easy. It didn't help that the market itself became oversaturated. A lot of other companies realized the lucrative nature of these mystery boxes and started making their own versions, in particular the Funko Pop figurines. For a while, Loot Crate always made it a point to put the Funko Pops in their boxes, and that was really cool because Funko Pops were all the rage at the time. But eventually, Funko decided to start making their own boxes and not allowing Loot Crate to use them, which kneecapped them quite a bit. Beyond that, there was also the fad element of the whole stick. People eventually got sick of paying for a mystery, because sometimes you get a Loot Crate and just not be happy with what you got. Not every nerd has the same nerdy interests. There are Marvel people, there are DC people, they don't always overlap. There are Star Wars and Star Trek fans, and they don't always overlap. There are people who like Final Fantasy but don't necessarily like Fallout. I know those two are worlds apart, but you get my meaning. The point is that everyone has different interests, so when it came to putting just nerdy stuff in the Loot Crates, they started having trouble appealing to everybody because not everyone was getting, the kind of stuff they actually liked. So they started working on themed boxes that would be more apparent what you were gonna get. These would include things like the aforementioned Fallout box. There was WWE, anime focus, horror focus. There were different versions of the boxes you could get. But when you add different boxes with specific stuff in them, that results in a lot more to manage. And it began to stagger their subscribers to different boxes, which meant you had to get a whole different array of product in stock to put in said boxes, and you couldn't necessarily buy all of that product in bulk. You could only get a handful because you only needed a handful, and that was way more expensive in the long run than getting a whole bunch of stuff wholesale direct from the manufacturers. This all compounded into tremendous amounts of debt to other various private companies. A lot of them they wouldn't work with anymore, meaning they couldn't make themed boxes of them. Plus, remember, there was a ton of competition with other companies making these kind of mystery boxes. And in many of those cases, the boxes were already themed so the person knew what they were getting, to a certain extent, at least in terms of what genre or series it was a part of. Heck, there were even some influencers who made their own custom mystery boxes for their following. Like, the whole market was becoming saturated with all these random boxes, just so many boxes everywhere. It was becoming ridiculous, and the fad was starting to wear off. Maybe I should make my own mystery box. I'll call it the Darkness Box, and inside you'll find nothing. Because within darkness, you find only the empty, lonely void of eternity. $19.99 a month. You're welcome. Anyway, and because it was so hard to manage and debt was stacking up, the founders were getting stressed out and were having trouble actually maintaining quality control. A lot of subscribers found that they either weren't getting their boxes just sucked consistently, or some were reporting they were overcharged, with a handful saying that the company had drained their bank accounts, charging them multiple times a month for what was supposed to be a single one-time charge. It was insane. Even if you were still in the market, for getting one of these boxes, you weren't in the market of getting robbed, so people stopped subscribing. And even when they had a ton of subscribers, it didn't necessarily translate to a lot of profits because of that not being able to get the stuff on wholesale issue. The profit margin was very low on these boxes. And the licensed ones that use the names of other big companies were expensive, and they very rarely made the money they needed to make back. And what they found is that many people that were getting the themed boxes weren't willing to get a subscription for the regular Loot Crate box, because they were only there for the theme, for what they actually wanted. And this was always the issue with Loot Crate, in my mind, as well as all these mystery box things. You never knew exactly what you were getting. And that in itself is a problem, because what you were paying for is a surprise element, but that wears off pretty quick, especially when the boxes wound up disappointing on occasion. It didn't take long for many people to realize, and this is the reason why I never personally actually paid for any kind of loot box back in the day, that it was a way more efficient use of your money that you had earned via a job, working hard, and didn't have much to spend on extra nerdy stuff you didn't necessarily need, to actually buy the stuff you wanted directly via Amazon, or even go to Walmart or Target, which has started to beef up their inventory of nerdy nonsense. Because I'm not going to judge anyone that wants nerdy nonsense for display purposes around their bedroom. I have a figurine of Shadowheart from Baldur's Gate on my desk right now. On top of my computer, Green Power Ranger, next to a Godzilla figurine, next to a Chow from Sonic the Hedgehog. Look, I get the appeal of this nerdy stuff, but I've always bought the stuff directly, and people started to realize that, yeah, actually, it's much better to pay for the things I really want and know I want, because I can visually see what it is. So those who had been once loyal to Loot Crate left as soon as the fad was over. YouTubers realized that the unboxing videos were no longer as popular and therefore not as profitable as they once were, so those also stopped. And even those that stuck with Loot Crate were getting more and more annoyed with them, and the management at Loot Crate was tearing their hair out trying to figure out how to manage all this, everything that they had built. And I can't overstate how many of the specialty crates they were pushing. For at least a few months in 2017, they had 27 specific different crates. It was basically impossible to make a profit on it because you couldn't get any of it wholesale because there weren't enough customers. And the customers they did have were getting more and more angry because they weren't getting their boxes at all. The boxes didn't have what they wanted. What was in there wasn't even very good. And by 2019, they could no longer continue. They announced that they were filing for bankruptcy and wound up firing more than half of their staff. They were in debt to the tune of millions, and I mean millions of dollars, to various different companies, like Marvel, Facebook, and Trendsetters. 30 million to be precise, and they actually owed taxes too, $5.87 million worth of those. And so ended the story of the original Loot Crate. But technically it is still around. Yeah, they even have a website. You can still do this if you want. They're just under new management and under a different name. On October 1st, 2019, all the people who were still subscribing to Loot Crate were informed by email that the company was sold to Money Chest LLC. It was funded by NECA and ECA, or the National Entertainment Collectibles Association Incorporated. They themselves are a manufacturer of collectibles, typically licensed from, well, nerdy stuff, films, video games, sports, music, the whole shebang, meaning that they already had a lot of experience with these licensed apparel things. They changed the company's name to the Loot Company and opted to continue forward, though in a much more downsized and controlled way. Meaning that Loot Crate isn't really dead in the traditional sense, but they're a shell of what they once were. As I mentioned, the whole mystery box thing was largely a fad. These days I haven't seen anybody making videos about it, nor do I know anyone who actually invests money into this. Because the other problem you have to remember is that this business model, especially, is very, very vulnerable to economic hardship. You already have to convince people to spend money on a mystery. But if they're already struggling financially, well, they're barely going to spend money on things they know they're going to get, let alone a mystery. It's those continued issues, that persistent uphill battle, the fact that their entire business centered around a craze, a fad, a novelty, meant that they had no longevity. You couldn't expect something like Loot Crate to last forever, purely because people weren't going to deal with it forever. Adding on the mismanagement element only made the situation worse. But I must admit I kind of feel bad for the guys because, they had a neat idea, and I don't think they intentionally tried to scam anybody with their mistakes. I think they were just in over their heads. The growth was insane, and managing all that is very difficult. People often sneer at big-time corporate managers, thinking that those guys at the top just sit around, do nothing, and get paid millions. But in reality, if a CEO or company president is doing his or her job, they are busy all the time, because managing a mammoth operation, crossing national lines, in this case shipping millions of boxes every year all over the world, which all had to be packed, shipped, tracked, verified, and figuring out what was going in those boxes. Look, it's a lot to worry about. And the guys just couldn't deal with it. Well, scratch that. They probably could have dealt with it, but if the growth had been a lot slower, then they could have had time to adjust, had time to get used to the busyness of it, perhaps hire more managers, stagger the management structure of the company, making things a bit easier for them. But they had no time to even think about that, because everything literally exploded. And it exploded in a good way. They were popular, but they couldn't manage that popularity. And when the craze died down, with many former subscribers burned from bad boxes, or non-existent boxes, or overcharges, yeah, there was no recovering from that, unfortunately. But hey, the Loot Company still exists, so if you're in the market for that sort of thing, it's a thing you can do. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fun farewell.